Welcome to Who Pays Taxes in Wyoming, a Tax Facts Lunch and Learn webinar hosted by Wyoming Tax Facts and the Equality State Policy Center. I am Jenny DeSaro, the Executive Director of the Equality State Policy Center. ESPC is an independent voice in Wyoming advocating for fair elections and transparent government in support of all Wyoming communities. Before we start today, logistics reminders. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. We may pitch a few questions along the way, but most will be reserved for the last 20 to 30 minutes. We'll get to as many questions as we can and we have time for. The chat feature is available. We'll put in some links in there. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Sue Summers.
Thanks, Jenny, the Equality State Policy Center and the Wyoming Community Foundation for making these webinars possible. And thanks to everyone attending today. I'm Sue Summers, co-founder of Wyoming Tax Facts. We're Wyomingites committed to a stable economic future for our state by increasing tax literacy in our communities. Learn more about us at wyomingtaxfacts.org. Today's presenter is House District 37 Representative Steve Harshman, who began serving in Wyoming's House of Representatives in 2003. Representative Harshman's thorough understanding of Wyoming's state budget, expenses, and tax structure is grounded in his years of service on critical committees like Appropriations, Revenue, and Education, as well as a host of select committees and task forces. The Wyoming House elected Representative Harshman as Speaker of the House for 2 consecutive terms, which is a very rare thing in Wyoming politics. In his hometown of Casper, Steve is also an esteemed high school teacher and coach with a 30-plus year career. Welcome, Representative Harshman. I hope I got your bio correct, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, well, thank you, Sue and Jenny, for having me, and thanks for all the folks who have joined us today, and thanks for your kind introduction. And most importantly, my wife, Rebecca, the former Becky Russell of Spearfish, South Dakota, I met when I was there, and she's stuck with me now for 38 years. Myself, and we have 4 beautiful kids who are all fully grown, blink of an eye. And so you get called a lot of things, but the greatest deal is being called dad. So been really honored to serve in the Wyoming legislature and return obviously home and serve as a native of Natrona County, growing up in Midwest Wyoming. Okay, just want to, when you were introducing yourself, Jenny, the Equality State Policy Center, and I wonder how many times that just kind of, and you think about Wyoming's incredible history and why we are the equality state, and the first government in the world to grant women's suffrage, 1869 as a territory, and then ingrain that in our Constitution. And then the U.S. Congress says, no, you're not coming into the Union with women's suffrage. And our territorial governor that time said, we're coming with our women or we're not coming at all. And we have such our state constitution is so beautifully written, and it's different from many other states, and it ingrains some of these incredible rights, particularly the right to public education, that was really goes back to the Northwest Ordinance, before we even had our current constitution, when the Wild West was the Ohio country, right? And Wyoming has got so much incredible history, and you read our Constitution, it's just incredible. But anyway, I didn't plan on speaking about that, but who pays taxes in Wyoming? And perhaps, that's how we pay our bills. I mean, that's why we've, even medieval times in Europe, we've come together to do these things as a community that really charity and folks on their own can't do. And so really that's the whole structure there. So I'm gonna, if I can move on here, if this will work for me. Okay, so the basics obviously on taxation, a sales tax, a property tax, and an income tax. Now there's other variations of things, but those are the basic 3s. Now Wyoming has a sales tax. There are 5 or 6 states in the United States don't have a sales tax. Montana to our north, Oregon, And then property tax. Property tax are one of the oldest taxes that have been around. Again, probably medieval England. It's it's sometimes called ad valorem, and it's based on the value. And really, all taxes are somewhat based on value. And whether it's a sales tax, you'll pay more for a higher valued item. But really, the ad valorem today, people generally refer to as property tax. And then, of course, income tax. And most states have all three of these. Wyoming and a few others just have two of those. But Wyoming, of course, doesn't have a personal income tax. But I like to call the severance tax we have on minerals, it's really, you could call that an income tax. It's based on the value of the mineral at the time of extraction. And so we've had that severance tax as a huge piece, but not a personal income tax. Okay. So then just talking about who pays our bills, I want to talk about minerals. Obviously we were blessed with that. And so we've got this chart, and all these charts are really, they're LSO products, and they're on the website, or they're Department of Revenue type products. So you can see, and I just want to, oops, I went forward one, and I'm going to close out this. So you can see 2006, and just the rule of thumb, and I won't get into this too deep, but the rule of thumb, an estimate is that minerals pay about half of our taxes. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's a little less, but it's in that 40 to 60%. And you can kind of see this severance tax, federal mineral royalties, and minerals portion of sales tax, right? And so you can kind of see that's over 50% back in 2006. And you think about all three of the mineral streams. We talk about taxes as a three-legged stool: income, sales, and property tax. We don't have that third leg, but our minerals, we also kind of had a third leg of minerals. We had coal, oil, and natural gas. And boy, all three were rocking pretty good in 2006. We had coal bed methane, and then the deep gas in Pinedale, Sublette County is coming online. All that stuff is going pretty good. And then you look in 2022, so we've got federal mineral royalties, the sales tax, and the severance tax. And so it's a little bit less. It's more about 40%. So I'll just say the rough number's about 50%, and it'll go from 40 to 60. But I want you, before we click forward, just look at this green part. This investment income has moved from 11 to 27% of our revenues. And I call that really legacy minerals. I'm going to talk some more about it, but I want you to get that picture before we move forward. And really, as you think again of those three-legged stool of taxation: sales, property, and income tax, Wyoming does not have an income tax. I think mainly because of this investment income is kind of our third leg of the stool and providing revenue to our state. So it's really important, and we've worked very hard to maximize that. And some more history on that in a minute. Okay, if I can get this to work, and I will. I'm just hitting okay. I just want to make sure. This is historical parts of operating budgets, and you can see the blue line is minerals going back to 2002, and we got deep gas and the Pinedale and the coal bed methane. Coal is rocking pretty good, but natural gas really starts to decline right here, drops off, and nobody even really talks about it because oil's picking up and coal's doing great. And then right in here in 2015, coal crashes. And we went from nearly 500 million tons down to 200 million. It's picked up a little bit, but you start to see some, fracking and horizontal wells, those kind of things. 16, 17, though, was a brutal drop, the fastest drop in state revenues and the sharpest drop in state's history. You see COVID, the Saudi-Russian price war, and then it bounces back, of course, when the Russian-Ukraine war hits and the prices come back up again. And now gas has recovered a little bit. Coal has stabilized around 200 million, a little over 200, but we're really kind of a one-horse deal now, and it's mainly oil. And I tell you, I watch the price of oil every day. We got to be at $60. or we have some issues. And we're kind of inverse of the national economy because everything runs on petroleum products. All of our medicine, fertilizers, construction, plastics, everything, technology. And so when the price of oil is high, all those things get higher, leads to inflation, hurts our national economy. But when the price of oil's high, Wyoming's rocking. And it's awesome for us, but it's bad for the national economy. Conversely, then when, $20, $30 oil is great for the national economy. I mean, everything is cheaper to build, manufacture, and transport, grow, etc. But it's tough on us. And we've been through those kind of boom and bust. So we're always kind of hoping for that, a nice sweet spot is that $60 to $70 oil. Things keep moving along pretty good. You can see our investment income. When I first came in the legislature, we had just passed in 99, 2000, changed the Constitution to allow us to invest in equities. Before, all we could do were really bonds and cash. And I mean, if we would have had the opportunity back in the 70s to invest in equities, the permanent mineral trust fund would be even bigger than it is. So we started here, and then I brought an amendment back in the day, and we had this plan to go to 4x10 plan. So we're sitting here 2003, 4, and we've got $2 billion in the permanent mineral trust fund. And because of the severance tax on minerals, we've always saved 25% of that as a constitutional goes into the permanent mineral trust fund, but we saved an extra percent, brought it up to about 40% saving the severance tax. And then that thing just took off, and we doubled the size of the permanent mineral trust fund by 2010. And then we got to 2010, we said 8x18. I'll show you that here in a bit. But then you see non-mineral stuff, kind of just that's your house taxes, business taxes, sales taxes. But investment income's been a steady riser on this thing. Okay. Percent of minerals and non-minerals, you can see that again. Kind of says the same thing, and I'll just let you look at that. And federal mineral royalties, coal lease bonus, state royalties. This was a huge part, was coal lease bonus. Went away when I was speaker. That's how we built our schools in the first round, a couple billion. That's how we built the Hathaway Scholarship, were coal lease bonus. And those have gone away for good. We no longer are getting any of those. So, okay, but you can kind of see this minerals versus non-minerals over the years. And we're kind of this 50% piece. Okay. And then talking about now, and I've kind of led into it a little bit. So minerals pay 50% of our bills roughly as a rule of thumb, 40 to 60%. And they pay that through the severance tax. They pay some sales tax, obviously, and then they pay property tax. And when I get to property tax, I'll talk about their property tax. And then they pay on the federal lands. See, 2/3 of our minerals are owned by the federal government. And we get federal mineral royalties. We get half of that amount. Okay, but so that's a huge part that pays half of our bills roughly. But then this is what I call legacy minerals. And these are the investment accounts that where we've taken taxes on minerals, the severance tax and other royalties, and built these trust funds that then will kick off permanent, investment income forever. And so legacy minerals are the permanent Wyoming Mineral Trust Fund. You'll hear it sometimes just called the PMTF or the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund, and then the common school accounts, been with us since statehood. And when we produce state minerals that are on state trust lands. And, we started as a state with 4 million acres of state trust lands. Most of them are for schools, and some of them are for state institutions, university, etc., school for the blind and deaf, etc., the prison trust lands, university trust lands. But that account has grown as well, and we're continuing to grow it. Okay. Now some earnings off of these accounts, and and you can just see what the Wyoming per capita piece is, this green boxes. And I'll tell you, Wyoming is passed Alaska a few years ago as #1 in the nation as investment income per capita. And Alaska has a massive trust fund that's, 3 times our size. But you can see as a percent of general funds then, our earnings, and then percent of the total appropriation in red. And so you can see it's got some volatility to it. Obviously 16 had dropped and all those things, but it's it started here at 10%, and we're getting some points where now we're over 20%, and this has rebounded again as well. But as a rule of thumb, our investment income used to be around 10% of our revenue. Now it's 20% or more. And so I like to say that minerals are roughly 50% of our bills, and legacy minerals pay the other 20% of our bills. So about 70% of our bills are paid by those two. So legacy minerals investments are sometimes 15 to 30%, and minerals are 40 to 60%. Another little chart just kind of looking at the growth, and I can't see I just want to, oops, I went too far. Okay, back where I was. You can see these authorization, and I talked about this, invest in equities in 2000. So here's the permanent mineral trust fund, and the Constitution said that all earnings went to the general fund. So we spent basically every dime of it, and the corpus hardly grew. And for these first, 25 years, and we're sitting here, $1 billion, and then we say, okay, saving the extra 1% in 2004, and bam, we get up here, we're at 4 billion, and then we take off, and now we're, in market share pushing 12 billion in the permanent mineral trust fund. And so we'll double that thing again in the next decade. So it's pretty exciting how the power of compounding in these investments. Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else on this slide. I'll keep moving. Okay. So Wyoming's revenue problem, as I like to describe it, many times we have enough money to pay our bills. And I'll just say this, Wyoming is the only state in the union we have zero debt. We don't owe anybody anything, and we pay all our bills. We pay cash. All our building projects, we don't use, we bonded the dormitories at the University of Wyoming because the money was basically free. Interest rates, you'll recall, a few years back were so low. So that was just a smart money move by Patrick Fleming, who you've met before on these webinars. And so, but we don't owe anybody anything. So our revenue problem is not so much how much money we have, but it's the volatility of it. And it's the up and down cycles. And this is a chart off our website, but and here it is, the mineral states, Wyoming, North Dakota, and Alaska, the most volatile revenue in the United States. And that's the thing that is so tough. It's the up and downs, and as a kid growing up in Midwest Wyoming, it used to be the largest oil field in the world in the 20s there, and home of the Teapot Dome scandal and all those things. It's been tough. I remember bumper stickers as a kid, Lord, give me one more boom and I promise not to waste it. And so this volatility issue. So how have we tried to kind of deal with that? One way I think is we've created the rainy day fund, and we started that in 2004 or 5, and we called it intentionally the Legislative Stabilization Reserve Account. It's has over basically a year of our operations are in savings. It is a hardworking account. We got a lot of things hooked onto it, from the schools to other things, but hopefully we can keep that strong and not drain that down. And we've used it, back in 16, 17, and then during COVID, we used it. So we have used it to kind of, smooth out the inevitable downturns in the price of minerals. So that's been a big piece of that. And I'll just say with our investment, our legacy minerals, there's some volatility to that as well. But we've tried to smooth that out through, our trust fund system, the way it's set up. We're trying to guarantee a 5% return with a large reserve accounts. I won't go into all that. It's too much for this webinar, but we've got large reserve accounts that will take those out multiple years, because as we forecast, like every government in the world, we forecast revenue. We don't cash basis. Investments, we only forecast dividends and interest, which is about 2.1%. Now, if any of us had a financial manager that was only returning 2.1%, we would get a new financial manager. And so like this last year, obviously we made 9-10% realized capital gains, but we're only going to spend 5% of that 5-year rolling average, 5%. So we kind of guarantee this 5% to our people and to operate these services. And we have this reserve account that will help guarantee that when there is a year that we only get 3%. Then we'll kick in a little money to get to that 5%. And so that part flows. So we've tried to even out these investments. But I'll just tell you, you saw these guys in red coats a few weeks ago. What they were doing was looking out 6 years when the reserve account can't last that long on a 2% rate of return on just a forecast. It doesn't mean anything. And in fact, July 1st came around and we've made that up and grew the reserve account. So, we're in really good shape as far as our reserve accounts and our investments. And boy, we just don't want, and there's a movement out there. There's some people that would like to, in the Wyoming's current political climate, would like to do away with them. They say, oh, it's the people's money. Well, to give back to people. Well, actually, it was international mineral companies were a big part of it that put most of the money. Sure, there were small operators, but that's been in there for years and years and years, and now investment income. But that's out there, and boy, we don't want to destroy that for sure. Okay, so property taxes, the ad valorem piece that we talked about earlier, is really 3 things. It's first based on value, and that in Wyoming, and it doesn't say it in our Constitution, but the Supreme Court has ruled that that's what it means, is fair market value. So if I'd sell my house or you'd sell your house today, what would it go for? And that's what the assessor, they're always watching that, right? And they're always working all their tools and to find out what that market value is. And then that's what the assessment is on the fair market value. I think that's really important, because the first thing in taxation, it ought to be fair and equitable. I shouldn't be in a $500,000 house next to a guy next to me with the same house, but his is valued at only 100,000 because he bought it years ago, and we decided to move to the California method of acquisition value. It's not fair, so I think the first thing is fair market. 49 other states use fair market, and so Wyoming does too. And we have a really good method of valuing that. It's one of the best in the country. And then the other key thing then, so here's the value. Say your home's valued at 100,000, but we tax it at 9.5%. That's the percentage of the tax that gets applied to it. Minerals is 100% on property tax, and industrial is 11.5%, but residential, commercial is 9.5%. Now, agriculture is also 9.5%, but there's a thing in our Constitution, provision in our Constitution that says on the ability of the land to produce. So assessors are looking at land. Is it irrigated? Does it grow crops? Is it how? And you'll see ag doesn't hardly pay any property taxes on ag lands in Wyoming. It's such a small amount, you could almost get rid of it. It's now they'll pay on their houses. They'll carve out, the assessor will carve out an acre where their home is at, and they'll pay, but the lands itself. But then I think the third, okay, and let me just say this percentage piece, we just passed a constitutional amendment that we can break homeowners out of it into its own category, because it used to be just minerals, industrial, and all other. Okay, now we've got minerals, industrial, all other, and residential. So there's an opportunity for us to lower that a little bit, although there's other constitutional provisions. They got to be within a certain percentage of each other. We could theoretically lower that to 8.3%. Hasn't happened yet. Okay, but then I think the third part is the key is the number of mills. And the average across the state of Wyoming is actually at a decades low because we don't bond school projects anymore. Wyomingites are paying on average the lowest mill levies, number of levies they have in recent modern state history. And that average is 68. And so what does that mean? So it's a taxable rate of 9.5, 68 mills. And so it's about, on average, 100,000 in value would be about a $600 yearly tax.
And Steve, I just want to jump in here for people who might not be as familiar with property taxes. The percentage of 9.5% is not the tax rate.
No,
It's the assessment ratio. So whatever your home is valued at, you multiply it times less than 10%, and that is the value that gets taxed. Do I
it's
have that
taxed
right?
100 exactly by a mill, right?
Yes.
Which is a
Yes. And then the
1,000%.
the tax amount depends on your mills, is times your mills.
Exactly.
But when you look
So,
at your property tax
so the effective
assessment,
tax rate is about 6%. You're right, Sue, and I'm so glad so the taxable value is 9.5% and the number of mills is 68 average. And so that value is about 6%. So again, 100,000 or 0.6%. So 100,000 in value will be about $600. 0.6%. Yeah, not 6%. So, $300,000 house, about an $1,800 tax bill. Now we've passed a 25% exemption on that, so they'll go down by 25%. If you've had a $2,000 tax bill, it's going to go to 1,500, and for the first million of value. Okay, yeah, and so it's one of the lowest in the country, and I'll show you those at the end. There are a few lower than us, but we're one of the lower. Okay, let me just. And some of this on my screen doesn't look, but I just wanted to put this in and show Wyoming's historical assessed value. And this is everything. This is all properties and minerals. And you can see these. I remember we were, 10 billion. That's what our state was worth, 10 billion. And you can see it's grown. See, the mineral wealth was a big part of this. This is in 206. This is deep gas, Jonah gas, and coal bed methane. And coal mining, man, it's going like crazy. And so you see this. Sorry about that. I touch my screen and sometimes moves it. And it takes off and keeps going. And then look at this, coal crashes, drops, 600 million. So we're $20 billion. And then, we go through some of that. But you can see at the bottom, and that hopefully you can see on your screen 22 and 23, it starts to take off after COVID. Now, some of that's minerals. That's the Russian-Ukraine war. Oil went up to $100. But most of that, not most, but a big chunk of that is residential. And we had everybody moving in here. And we all saw, well, there was one point over half our counties one year had double-digit increases. Lincoln County had a 33% one year. And that went on for like 3 or 4 years. That's why all the outcry over property taxes. And so that was the work. I mean, it was 4 years of my life. I answered thousands of emails on this, but you can see that. And I can't see 23 on mine. Can you see that, Sue? Or I'm not sure.
No,
But
it doesn't quite show.
okay, and it's more actually too. It's approaching 30 billion. So that is a lot of residential property tax. Okay. And you can see it here, 23, 4 over here, and we're, 24, we're approaching 35 billion. Again, a lot of residential increase and some minerals too, no doubt about it. Minerals a big driver of it. Okay. You can see this mineral production property tax value. These are property taxes now. Mineral values, here we go. Jonah gas, coal bed methane, boom, takes off with coal. Coal's booming, and then natural gas crashes. Nobody even talked about that though, because oil and coal were doing so well and we were doing pretty good. And then you can see if I can get my mouse going again. Okay. And then here, 16, 17, that steep drop I talked about. And then you can see COVID, where we actually went negative on the price of oil, where the asset was a liability. And then you can see other classes though. And here's COVID. And here is a lot of residential just takes off in the red. Okay. And then in 2024, the percent of assessed values, and you can just see that ag lands, commercial, industrial, residential is about 30% of it, right? And the minerals are right around half of it, pay half our property taxes. And again, that's at 100% of value on the day it's extracted. So, and we've gone, you probably won't recall, but back when my speaker days, when we had some bankruptcies because we used to collect mineral property taxes once or twice a year, just like we do with our residential property taxes. And we had some bankruptcies and we lost some property tax. So we have passed a law now that mineral companies pay their property taxes every month, just like they pay their severance taxes. So they don't get behind on that thing. Okay, next slide. Assessed values. Again, you can kind of see how minerals is dominated in the blue, and it's gotten more leveled out with other property levels with COVID. That's just another way of looking at it. This is a school district revenue. This is the total amount it costs to run our schools. Now, how do we fund schools? We're like every other state. We fund it with property taxes primarily. And these are these local property taxes in that dark dotted line, right? Some of them are mineral. Some of them, Teton County is obviously a huge residential property tax generator. Well, Wyoming, remember, we used to be rich districts, mineral districts, had better schools. Well, we equalize all that now. And so when Teton County they pay 40 million more this last year in residential property tax than it takes to run the Teton County School District. Well, that 40 million goes to the state and helps fund places in, think of non-mineral counties in the eastern part of the state, Niobrara and others. And so there's our bill at the top. Here's our local resources. You can see it's more than state resources. But then here's the problem, you get into a oil spike or economy goes down, local resources go down, and so do state resources, but the state has to pay more. And that's what we always call the double whammy. Local resources go down, the state has to meet the bill and pay more at a time the state has less money. And so here we are, COVID, now it's bounced back up, and you see this big uptick in the local share, and that's residential property taxes, Russian-Ukraine war, Commerce County oil. Those are big drivers right here, where we saw now local revenues, which are property taxes, local property taxes, are paying most of the school bill again, and not state revenues. Okay, sales tax, and there's a lot of info on here. I don't know if you can see all that. We have one of the lowest sales tax burdens in the country. I don't know if you can see that top stuff. We're like at $20 per thousand income. South Dakota's 31. Here's basic annual income of $68,320,000. Typical Wyoming family, about $1,200 in retail sales taxes, and their property taxes will be about $2,000. It's one of the lowest tax burdens in the country. Our sales tax has plenty of exemptions. We have about 55 exemptions. Groceries is the big one. Passed that when I was on the revenue committee in 2004. We don't tax rent, fuel,
Uh-oh, it looks like we've lost Steve. Jenny, can you come back on, please? And you're muted.
While we're waiting for Steve to rejoin us, uh, there is no questions in the Q&A. So if everyone was too afraid to submit a question because you were listening so intently, now's your moment. And while we're bringing Steve back in.
Jenny, if I have some links I want to post in the chat, can you give me permission to do that?
Yeah.
Oh, Steve's back, only he's got my name again. We
Now
fixed that before.
I'm on a phone now, so I don't know. My computer just went black. And so can you share those slides? You've got them.
Yep.
Sorry about that. Jeez, I'm just sitting there and it went boom. So apologize to the folks who.
Steve, has anybody calculated what the latest round of property tax relief programs, how that will impact our revenues, especially since we're supposed to spend more money on education now with the court case happening?
Right, the 25% exemption for the first million. It's going to be about $110 million in tax relief, and 70, 80 million of that will be to K-12 education. The rest will be local governments. So yeah, absolutely. So, but I think I'll kind of finish with that. But okay, and then you can see that slide. Appreciate it. You can see who number 3 there, the major NAICS codes. You know, the number one industry is retail trade. Most of our retail trade collectors, though, are big box and out of state. I mean, we always think it's mom and pop collecting the sales tax. But online, we were like the last state in the union to do online sales tax, and it totally changed the game, of course, once we did that. Hotels, restaurants are number 2, and most of that is paid by out-of-staters, and most of it comes from Teton County. It's pretty incredible. And then, you know, the 9% or so on vehicle sales and the others, and then utilities and mineral companies pay a lot of sales tax on utilities because they use a lot, of course. So how much is paid by visitors? As I said, about 85% of the lodging tax is paid by visitors, and most of it's from Teton County. Okay, and then down there to number 5, out-of-state comparisons. And I talked about big box, but if you look clear down to 6, kind of the example sales tax, Wyoming's listed first at 5.4, and then it goes from left to right. You can see Idaho at 6, and South Dakota is 6.1, and it goes all the way across there. North Dakota's at 7. So these are
Steve, you're muted. I don't know how that happened, but your sound cut out.
okay. How's that?
Okay,
My
perfect.
Yeah. So we were looking at these at the bottom of that. You can see Oregon and Montana are not in that. That's everybody in the Midwest and the West. And you can see Wyoming is the lowest. And that is state rate of 4 and an average local then of 1.4. So a 5.4 rate. Okay, I think you're ready for the next slide, if that works. This is right off of our LSO website. It's a revenue committee kind of production that talks about just kind of comparing us in all taxes. Wyoming consistently ranks among the lowest in the nation. So that first one is just the tax burden on a household income of 50,000. It's about 2,600 a year, which ranks us 50th. The next one, combined state and local taxes, tax rate, we're right 44th. You know, sales tax rate. And again, there's 5 or 6 states that don't have a sales tax. So we're one of the lowest sales taxes in the country. And it's 5.4, I think, is property tax.
Steve, I'm having a problem hearing you. Jenny, is that true for you as well? You're kind of,
And
you've
each
been
state's
cutting out.
largest town is how they have the
Oh,
lowest tax burdens, and that's because of minerals and legacy minerals are investments. Okay, I think the next.
and Jenny,
Okay,
can you
can you hear me?
enlarge the slide deck too? So that we can see everything. Oop. We're looking at your browser, it looks like. Well, Steve, you can keep talking while we're struggling with the tech if you'd like.
I'm
Sorry.
trying to get my computer going again too. My I don't know. And my computer is kind of I don't know. Okay, so you're on to that next.
Yeah. You're done with this slide.
Right there.
Okay, yeah.
And I think down at the bottom you can kind of see that it's, Wyoming is 50th, and then and tax burden. Okay, and then I think you got the closing slide. Is that where you're at?
Yep. Mhm.
Okay. And so closing comments really, who pays Wyoming's bills? And can you hear me all right now, Sue? Is that
Yes.
okay? We have the smallest population and the 10th largest state. And some of the guys who are going after some of the, common sense stuff are like, oh yeah, we're the highest per capita, this and that in the country. Well, we are. We have the most expensive road per mile in the country. We have the most expensive prisoner in the country. We have the most expensive, not the most, but one of the most expensive per student in K-12 school, most expensive community college student. And we just don't have that economy of scale. And it's a tough deal. And we're still have to, provide all these services. And some of them aren't even rural. I mean, they're frontier services. You think about our population of 560,000 people, we're like a suburb of Denver. And if that, and in the 10th largest state. So, yeah, it's expensive, but we have the smallest state budget in the United States. As I mentioned earlier, we pay cash for everything. And when you adjust for inflation, it's a similar size budget and smaller than some of the budgets 20 years ago. And same with the number of state employees. And so we have been voted multiple times, year after year, as the best run state in the country. And so as a rule of thumb, then I'll just leave minerals pay 50% of our bills. And most of that is out of staters paying that because we're shipping the oil and gas and coal out of state. And then that gets added on to utility bills and gas bills, et cetera. So we're really blessed and I think Wyoming has been genius in this, where out of staters pay most of our bills. And then this investments, the legacy minerals paid another 20%. And then another interesting fact, and I'm talking really about our general fund in schools, but there's a big chunk of our budget that is federally funded. And, half of our Medicaid, we're a 50-50, which is low as you can go because of Teton County raises our state income, but and the federal government, our roads, et cetera. So the federal government pays another 20% of our bills separate from state generated revenue.
Steve, is that going to be impacted by the current administration's cutting of federal
that's
funding?
A great question. And most of those cuts are going to happen to not like state government or local government, but it's going to happen to like nonprofits that provide services in your community. That's where most of that's going to happen. Now, I'll say this on the Medicaid piece. You know, with Obamacare, there were some serious subsidies for people who were not quite retired, many people working that were poor. They could go on the exchange and buy pretty good insurance for a very heavily subsidized rate. A lot of those subsidies are going to disappear. I think these work requirements and some of the requirements to check in, it's going to make it, a person's going to have to stay that, like a long-term Medicaid person is going to have to keep reapplying and reapplying. Instead of once yearly, it's going to be moved up. And so I think there'll be some people drop off of some of these programs. There's no doubt. Whether, you know, I know some people want to say it's waste, fraud, and abuse, but I think Wyoming, I will say this, Wyoming is going to be one of the least cut because part of it's based on ratings on how well your system is run, because all these things are, you know, are all looked at and audited. And Wyoming has one of the best run systems, you know, for lack of waste, fraud, and abuse. So we're going to take smaller cuts than other states. There's no doubt. But I think there will be people drop off to answer that. 100%, Sue, I think on that. So, and then this last part, I'll just say, I think we've solved the double-digit property tax increases. You know, and what we really needed in place was what we passed, I don't know, 4 years ago, was the 4% growth cap. If we'd have had that in place all along, we wouldn't even be talking about property taxes. And, you know, because our average in Wyoming has been 2, 3, 4%, you know, except for the bus, you know, in Casper, when I moved back here in 91, there were 600 houses for sale. They're all, you know, foreclosures. But generally, you know, so they've gone down in value, but generally Wyoming's grown 3, 4% a year for the last 25 years. And then we hit these double-digit increases. Everybody rightfully was, you know, upset about it. It was caused by out-of-staters moving in here 100%, and visitors who became residents. But if we'd had the 4% cap, I just think we'd have never even had to talk about any of this. But we have that 4% cap. So that I didn't talk about this property tax. You cannot raise the number of mills. That's 68 mills I talked about. Many states, local governments can raise mills on their own. Wyoming, they're all constitutionally set. Local governments can't raise them. And then, of course, you know, it's based on fair market value. But again, we've capped that growth now at 4%. Your fair market value can only grow up to 4% a year.
Right. And there's some questions in the Q&A I'd really like to get to. So I'm going to jump on that. Also, there is a page on the Wyoming Department of Revenue website under the property tax where you can find all of the property tax relief programs in one place. And it's a big PDF. So very easy to find. Now, I see a question here about do we know of anyone who's presenting this information in a way that the average voter can understand? I would say I'm going to put in a plug for Wyoming Tax Facts because that was the intent of that website. And I try to keep it updated. If you find a mistake, my contact info is on the website, so let me know. And that is my goal with wyomingtaxfacts.org. Another question, let's see, it's hard to pick. Chris Clements, our reporter for Wyoming Public Radio, is asking, sorry, I probably shouldn't have outed you as a questioner, Chris. He's asking, how likely is it that the LSO's projection of a $686 million shortfall for the school account by 2029 will actually happen? Do you think the legislature will act to stop that happening? Uh-oh, oh, darn it. That's
We'll
a
be back
very
in.
inopportune, yeah, very inopportune break there. Hopefully we'll get back to that question. We have other questions about um, uh, the relative regressivity of our tax structure, where the burden appears to land more on people of low incomes than on those who can better afford the taxes being levied. And if we can get Steve on here, we can pitch that to him. We aren't out of time yet. We've still got 9 minutes. So hopefully here we go. Yeah. Steve, unmute yourself. And I was just asking that question about the LSO's projection. Did you hear that question?
I did not. I thought you dropped off, but I guess I dropped off again. I got you. Okay, okay? Their projection, they is based on $60 oil, other sales tax, property tax, but then investment income. They only project dividends and interest was 2.14%, and so we have a reserve account. Say, okay, you're only getting 2%, and then we give 3% from reserve account in year one. Great. Year two, 3% from the reserve account. Year 3 and 4, and we can, so that profile looks really good for 4 years. And then you get into 5 and 6. Our reserve account is not that big to go out 5 and 6 years yet, where so it drops off, and so you see a 3% drop in revenue, which is 20% of our income. So you look at hundreds of million, $300 million drop off a year. You go, oh my goodness, Wyoming is in a deficit. It's coming. We got to cut budget. Well, no, it's actually because of a forecast. And I'll just say this: when I was chair of appropriations and when I was speaker, we did 4 years. The legislature always did 4-year projections. It's silly to go out 5 and 6 years. I mean, we know how quickly things can change. I mean, we're based on a national and international energy prices. And so if you do a 4-year estimate, we're in pretty good shape. And, but when you do the 6-year, then you got guys lining up with red coats and stuff and saying, the sky is falling. And so I think we got to be really careful. And that's a little nuance. And it'd be my hope that those on the appropriations committee now would go back to that 4 years. So it's really more, so you can give the people of Wyoming really accurate numbers. And, if we have another, people say, oh gosh, the stock market crash. Well, the stock market crashes 1929 again. We're going to have bigger problems than any of this stuff. Right. So I'm not worried about that issue. I'm just trying to get accurate projections so we're not riding this roller coaster and scaring our people and all that stuff.
Okay. I have 2 questions about the regressive nature of sales and use taxes and somewhat, I'm just going to read this. I think it's mainly people concerned about sales taxes being changed to possibly make up shortfalls in property tax and how that lands on low income people. So I bet you have a point to make about that.
Yeah, no, and that's a little bill I brought. And you're right, sales tax is more regressive. There's no doubt about it. But Wyoming has a couple things, and number one is the exemption on groceries, and a gallon of milk is the same to a rich person or a poor person. Now, if you're really poor, you're going to be on SNAP benefits, and so that's not going to be an issue. But I tell you, when I talk to, homeowners and particularly landlords, they say, the reason I'm raising the rent on people is because my property taxes are going up double digit a year and I got to cover it. I have a $500 increase in property taxes. I'm adding that to the rent. And so that was part of that thing. And I don't disagree. So the second round of that bill, I put in there what's called a renter refund, or because we and some states do this, many states do this. Part of your rent check, we know, pays for the property tax, and so that was another way to kind of get around that, thinking about folks with poorer people who are renting properties. So it'd be a little break on that. But I don't disagree. But I will say our sales tax is probably one of the least regressive because we have like 55 exemptions to it. And I'll say this, that out-of-staters pay about 15% of it, and mineral companies pay sometimes up to 10% of it. And the ones who really didn't like it as well were the mineral companies folks. So, and I get that, but yeah, just trying to, and I think the flip side of that though, and getting into home ownership, people who have house payments, when we have house payments, a lot of that, of course, a big part of our house payment is mortgage, insurance, and taxes, right? That is part of our payment, and of course that would lower your house payment to $300 a month. That proposal I had, but I hear you. I mean, I don't disagree, but it's trying to strike kind of a middle balance. And I think even if Wyoming had a 7% sales tax, you can look at these other states as still pretty low, and particularly with the sales tax on groceries. Okay, enough talking. Sorry.
You mean the exemption on a sales tax on groceries?
The exemptions, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
No sales tax.
Gosh, what are the chances of the legislature passing an acquisition value bill regarding, no longer fair market value, but your property being taxed based on its purchase price? Do you think that has a chance?
I think the Freedom Caucus likes that idea. I think Tony Locke, I know, likes that idea, the Freedom Caucus chairman of Revenue. But I hope we wouldn't. I mean, I think it's a horrible idea. There's one state in the union has done this, California. It's totally wrecked their property tax system. And so what did they do? They had to raise other taxes. They raised sales and income taxes because you're going to have to pay the bills. But I think more than anything, it's a fairness issue. You've got, and I actually have people from California email me and tell me, that they couldn't make improvements on their house because when you make improvements, those get taxed in a full value, and that's part of that issue. And you get kind of trapped in your home. You can't sell because if you move, the whole thing changes, and then there's a lot of games being played too. Right? Mm-hmm. And those acquisition values stay in California with that. And so I think we just got to be really careful. The number one tenet on taxes is to be fair and equal, right? And people who are similar, and you shouldn't be in two houses sitting beside each other in the same neighborhood. And one is, valued at $1 million and you're at 100,000, basically the same house. That's not fair. And you can work at other ways with rates and exemptions and all that. But I think it's important to at least know what the fair market value is. At least have a baseline all the time.
Thank you, Steve. Jenny, have we got anything else, or do we need to wrap it up and let people get back to work?
Yeah, it's getting close to the hour. And again, apologies for the disconnections during this webinar, but thanks for staying with us and keep coming back. We appreciate your diligence, Representative Harshman, not only on the webinar, but in service to all citizens at our legislature. So thank you. We also want to send a little thanks to Wyoming Tax Facts and the Equality State Policy Center. Want to thank our sponsor, the Wyoming Community Foundation, as well as Steve, Representative Harshman, and we ask that you stay tuned for our next discussion. Please visit the Wyoming Tax Facts website for more information and details. And there was a note from one of our attendees that graphics are needed. So I'm sure Sue will be working on that.
Yes. Well, and thank you, Steve, for making it, because we've been trying to get you on this webinar for quite a while now, and we got it done. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.